we're doing with our partners and friends at Civil Device and Public First. I'm I need to do some housekeeping. It says here, which mainly involves fire escapes. I think basically it is a fire you can escape. Through back door, I believe, the other thing you should be aware of is that camera over there is currently broadcasting, narrowcasting, whatever it is, this event to YouTube and the investment YouTube channel. So when we get to Q&A, and we're keen to hear from all of you guys, just bear in mind you're not just talking to people and friends in the room, you're also talking to the internet, and the session will save up online after today, so you can go back and watch again. You'll be up there for posterity. That's about all the housekeeping. In terms of the project, we've lured you here on the promise, finding out and thinking about and talking about the future of policy to support people with energy. And you remember those? So that's what we had before the tax policy to talk about. The part of the project we're doing with Civil Device and first. We started back in the early summer with the advising ideas that will sustain for the long term. So we're interested in thinking about what policy should do to respond to high and volatile energy bills, not this winter, not next winter, but for the next 5 and 10 winters. If we're going to be living in a period of high and volatile prices for long term, what good policy, good sustainable policy to look like over that? Because our starting policy is shared in this partnership was that what we have at the moment is a set of capital and fiscal policy that we generally tack on to an existing policy base every year in response to that year's crisis. So we naively optimistic that we thought we'd try and sit down and take a slow, deliberate. If you could design that policy from taking into account political reality, of course, what would that policy be? That's what we're doing. The program that we're working on started in the summer with a series of workshops taking in industries, from society, academia, lots of political stakeholders, or politicians as I also know, to get a sense of what the different parties are thinking in terms of emerging policy. We are also doing a large program of public opinion research, which they hear about from Nick Parker for the first. And from that process, there emerged some possible points of consensus, some ideas and principles that we think could underpin seeds of all the parties come the next general election and beyond. So I'll talk a little bit more about that once we Q&A session. But I'm by far the most interesting person on this panel. So you'll hear else on the panel. We'll start first with Nick Moriarty, who's the Chief Executive of Civil Device. We'll then pass on to Nick Parker from Public First, who can talk about the opinion research, and finally we'll go to Laura Sands, who has too many titles and accolades and garlands in this field for me to list. So I'll let her do that, and then we can hear from all of you about what we think good and sustainable policy could be in this area. So that's the conversation. Very keen to hear from all of you. So this is a research approach as well as an engagement approach. So the conversation here will actually be informing our research work and our outputs later this year and next. So you are all like any things. Assume that more from both comes out. I'm going to hand it to Claire Moreno.
Thank you very much indeed, James, and thank you all for coming. It's great to have the opportunity to engage with people on this. And as James says, this is an opportunity for research as well as engagement. At Citizens Advice, we are the statutory consumer watchdog for energy. So we have a particular role in relation to energy. We also help around 2.5 million people a year, one-to-one, and about 10 million pounds, I think, via the self-service advice on our website. So we have a very good sense of what are the issues that people are dealing with, and at the moment it's very much about crisis support, and crisis that is very much driven by the steep rises in energy prices that we have seen and continue to see. So since the start of this year, we've helped 150,000 people with crisis support at the level of food bank vouchers and charitable donations, and 15,000 people who couldn't came to us for help because they couldn't top up their prepayment meter. And those are numbers which are running well ahead of where we have been in the past. And so, energy has been a very strong focus of all the work that we've been doing, all the help we've been giving to people over the last few months. And we have seen over that period pretty much every shape and size of government intervention, from fuel duty reduction to aid to the energy bill rebate, and some specific targeted support for people of the lowest income. Worried about it. And now we have the energy price guarantee, the 2-year holding down with discount on unit prices, such that a typical home could be paid about 2. But this is about the longer term. The expectation is prices are very high for quite a long time. And in any case, we need to be thinking about what would create a better link for our energy system. So in a way, although we had jointly started this piece of work before the energy, but that 2-year period was actually needs to be seen as the time frame for getting to a much more sustainable solution than something which is just what's the latest, in this case, very, very large significant milestone. So we need a system that works for people, that works for everyone, but particularly provides the right protection for people on low incomes. And this is an opportunity, as James says, to do that for the room. So one of the things which one of the things that massively and we expect to see on quite a lot of prices how they cannot take energy is something that's
you laid back the real world experience of what you're kind of help on forward basically. Say if possible to get swept away with whatever's really going to happen maybe outside the other side of the fence that there are some other issues possibly people in the real world are still more animated about their energy bills than they are about tax policy today. Just in case. The next speaker is Nick Park from Public First. Public First, are a specialist consultancy who frankly is to more praise. They're a consultancy who they're mostly in the think tank business. So which is why we have to work with them to work. We compete with the policy and the expertise to so Nick will talk to you about the program following the open proofing that we've been doing for English. We think formal or moving things like principle voters want to expect. Nick Park.
Thank you, James. Thank you for that kind of introduction. I'm Nick Park. I'm from Public First. As James said, we do try and master non-learning to gain our specialisms include opinion research, policy development, communication strategy, and economic modelling. and we're delighted to use those skills to do this project with Systems Advice. One of the aims of this project was to build policies that would have longevity, and that means and so part of the research that we're doing is competition roundtables that James is organising, as well as polling with. We did a poll of 2,000 adults in late July. We ran 4 focus groups in Wakefield and in Derby, with lower income families, and also with who were on above average incomes. Again, in late July, hoping to come as part of this project to really test in detail some of the solutions that are emerging from the project. I'm going to just run you through a few of these emerging findings from the polling that we've had, and I think some of it probably will not come as a surprise that cost of living is just a dominant issue for everyone in our polls and our focus groups. It has been so since probably the spring. And it's just getting more so as time goes on. In our most recent poll, cost of living was the top issue for 76% of voters. To give you a comparison, James said that somebody might talk about tax. The levels of taxation was top issue for 11% of voters. Climate change, 28% of voters. So tax is perhaps not front of mind for everyone in the country, although probably many people this morning. In our focus groups, people talk of little other than the cost of living. People are almost frightened. They talk to one another about energy saving and money saving tips as we're going through the kind of structured conversations that we do in focus groups. They are telling us of the ways that they're trying to cut down costs. You probably heard the chief executive of Iceland on the television the other day talking about people asking the cashiers at the checkout. Keep scanning until it gets to £40 and then clearly stop and put the rest back. These are things that people are changing in their lives, not just for their low income families, but we're seeing 69% of respondents who earn over 60,000 saying that they're cutting back on they're making real change to change what they're doing. Among everybody in the population, we found 48% cutting back on all non-essential purchases, 43% cutting back on going out, 20% cutting back on how much they eat. That's not how much they eat out. That's not how much of the more expensive foods they might choose to buy in the supermarket. That's 20% cutting back on actually how much they eat. If we turn to energy bills, higher income voters and lower income voters in our focus groups really were genuinely very worried about the prices of bills. They know that they've gone up, know that they're going up further, and genuinely they don't think that they've got the money left at the end of the month that will allow them to make ends meet. We asked them how they thought that bills were made up and what was causing the big changes in bills. They absolutely talked about the war in Ukraine. They talked about global factors. They talked about the end of the pandemic, but they also talked about supplier profit. And now many of us in this room know that most suppliers don't really make very much money at all, and 30 went bust at the end of last year because they weren't making a loss. When you ask the public, they've got a broad spread of views from almost nothing to making more than half of the bill being supplier profit. The mean answer, by the way, was 28% of the bill is profit for the supplier. We asked about the price cap. This was the Ofgem price cap in July, not the new price cap that's announced. Awareness of the price cap was really high. They knew there was a price cap, heard of it. And they were really supportive of the idea that there should be a price cap. They just didn't really understand it. Only a quarter of our respondents felt that they could explain what the price cap was or what it did. And in our focus groups, we had one focus group where we talked about the price cap early on, and then towards the end, they were getting quite confused about the price cap. And they came to a consensus that there really should be a price cap. The government should come along and introduce a cap on people's prices so that they knew how much they were spending, they knew they were getting a good deal. So awareness of it, the ability to really explain it to a friend or neighbour was really very low. But energy bills, this is obviously a function both of unit price, but also how much you use. And so energy efficiency was something that we wanted to talk to people in the whole of the focus groups about. And many people just don't believe that they need insulation at all. It just doesn't really feature on their register. In our group, in our poll, 63% thought that they either had enough insulation and didn't need any more, or that they didn't need it in the first place. So awareness of insulation as a measure that can reduce bills is probably, even when people are aware that they need it, they don't know where to turn for support. They don't know how to make sure that they don't get a rip them off. We asked people who should be responsible for insulating people's homes. The majority of people in our groups thought that homeowners should be responsible for their own homes, and really only saw a role for government or local government in the social rented sector. So again, perhaps rather different to sort of the conversations that we tend to have and that ACE tends to have at the moment. We turn to what needs to be done in terms of energy bill support, and this is much more on the sort of the straightforward financial side of things. In our poll, 62% thought that there should be specific financial support to help people with their energy bills. That level of support was over 50% among voters for all political parties. So this is a cross-party consensus issue. It was people on low incomes, pensioners, people with chronic health conditions, and the disabled who were the groups that people thought needed support the most. But people are feeling the pinch in all sorts of parts of their lives. And so when we asked about, for example, should there be specific help with water bills, 56% of people thought there should be specific help there. When we asked about specific help with food bills, it was over 50% wanted specific help there as well. So it's broad brush sense that people feel that they need some support. We asked about different ways that support could be given. Idea that it was a discount on energy bills, a bit like the £400 that's being given this winter, rather than a cash payment to households. They did support the idea of free insulation measures being given to households, but really they wanted the cash support either on its own or at least combined with the energy efficiency help. We tried to test with people the sense that there should be a threshold at which you didn't receive this energy bill support. And people higher income focus groups that we did really felt that the threshold should be set above where they felt that their own income was. When we tried to tease out a sort of threshold above which people might be able to manage their energy bills on their own, it really wasn't the upper end of the income spectrum. So people were expecting people on £60,000 a year to still be in receipt of effectively form of bill support. And I think that just really reinforces the people. And all in all, are deeply about the cost of living and the cost of energy bills, regardless of some of the supports we have in place. Energy bills next summer will still be double the level that they were at the time.
Very much. Grim as that is, final speaker is Laura Sands, who, as I say, has lots of time to clothes and garments and stuff. Laura, choose which credits she wears while speaking about energy. A great deal about it. Of course, some like certainly possible.
Hi, Laura Sands, and thank you so much for being included on this group of people who are looking at an absolutely crucial area. The things that I wanted to say who I am is context. My very first job was with Which and looking at consumer protection. So consumers have always been at the heart of what I'm considering important. And then subsequently, I represented an area and certainly the party where the average wage was £16,500 a week. And when you understand the difficulty and the challenge of every single day, I believe that low-income families are the smartest consumers in the country. When we can start recognising people on low incomes and the real problem, because these people are super smart. The problem is when they're super smart and they have nowhere to go. And I think that's where we are today. I totally agree with James about we've got a Christmas tree, but we're putting more and more and more toys on. And actually, it's the tree that needs to be refocused and reconstructed. And to Claire's point, we have 2 years. What we need is just for those ongoing ones, but for everybody who is a consumer. A new experience when we come off this price gap when it comes to the energy component of their lives. It has to feel different, it has to be different, and be in control. Kilowatt hour, do you know how to control that? Do you understand? We've got a unit price. That's wonderful. I pretty about this way. So this idea of 2,500 quid is going to be my maximum. That is actually what I think is going to happen. That is what we are doing. That's about exactly what that means and how it's developing. And certainly looking at my direct debit, it's nowhere near £2,500, and I don't know how to control it. So you've got a market where I have no levers of control. I don't understand the units by which I'm being provided. And I don't really actually understand how much that really costs. So we have got a totally flawed market that doesn't feel, experience is not like any other consumer good that I consume. So you look at broadband, you look at mobile, I feel a bit, I mean, we all know that none of these are perfect, but I do feel I have more control. The system from from in some ways the consumer's perspective into the system. At the moment, it's a bit of a hose pipe and it just comes down at you. And consumers pick up all risk. All risk is socialized within the system, and you answer your bills, but you are actually paying for supply failure. That is business failure, but we are picking up costs which really shouldn't happen. So new models, and I'm very, very interested, and a friend of mine, Jeff Hardy from Imperial, and I have written about decoupling something that one would determine as the essential service. Because a bit like water, energy is not nice to have. It is actually an essential service. But if you compare what's going to happen in the future, you're going to have the person with 3 Teslas and the swimming pool. And they are going to require a lot more energy than Mrs. Miggins, who is actually, in many ways, just utilising an essential service. Not saying it's perfect, but picking up from how broadband is delivered. You've got a very highly regulated essential service. And then you have a premium service, which is all that found Netflix, blah, 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 content, delivery, extra data, etc. And if what we can do is decouple a very, very thin layer of essential service, which absolutely is universal, and then on top of it, lots of competitive, exciting products, the Tesla package, the swimming pool package, whatever you want, you actually deliver quite a few different things. Firstly, you have a very low tariff for those people on that essential service, which is the social tariff, but it's universal. Second, you take away the tensions that currently suppliers have. So currently they are social entities because they're having to deal with vulnerability, quite rightly so, and they're trying to be competitive. And actually, I would say, in the end, they're not really succeeding at either. So let's decouple that and allow them to be highly competitive in that premium service. So actually change the whole dynamics of the system. So instead of, as a fact, very interestingly, Dubai have got the separate system, and they've got slab tariffs. So the lowest tariff is subsidised by the other tariffs. What has happened there is that everybody on higher tariffs have energy efficiency services that reduce total energy consumption which actually reduces the whole system costs. Because actually the incentives are in not consuming more, but consuming less. Currently, that is absolutely different. I mean, we make money by the quantity of energy used. Again, at a blank sheet of paper, as Claire rightly said, how do we create fairness tariff and for a much more competitive environment that incentivizes energy efficiency rather than energy consumption? It's a big challenge going forward. We've got 2 years and we've just got to get on with it.
Thank you very much. And actually, this wasn't planned, but actually, you perfectly set up the, I was going to say, question of great facts. Because you mentioned social tariff. When we did that program, engagement with politicians and stakeholders that I mentioned earlier on, looking for the emerging ideas about what could underpin some policy consensus. The word social tariff come up quite a lot. You use it in a slightly different context, which is why I think it could work down there. Because it's just for, I'm sorry, well, frankly, if you're surprised that you came to the think tank breakfast, rising block tariffs and tariffs and market reform. That's what you want, isn't it? So social tariff for could often be used to a price that a group of people are put on to a reduced cost for their energy supply. That idea is going to get a lot of currency as a business strategy select committee report in the summer saying look at social tariff for the future to replace current price support. But Laura, you're using social tariff there in the context of a rising block tariff, aren't you?
So I think that there are some really issues. I mean, from what I understand, if you have better stats on this, is that if you're looking at low consumption, about 80% of people on low incomes are low consumers. There are 20% that are much higher consumers, right? A much higher consumption in low income areas.
Either because they have a large, sometimes they have very low certain conditions require energy use for
Absolutely.
A warmer home.
And I would say that actually social tariff creates a privilege.
Yeah.
We saw this a lot in Planet where I was, where there was just this constant fear of moving from a supported environment financially to suddenly an unsupported one. And so I think that 20%, it was quite interesting. The Energy Systems Catapult have got a fabulous programme that they've been doing with the NHS in Worcestershire, which is energy on prescription. And what they did was the NHS paid for certain people with sort of dialysis machines, etc., etc. Why does the NHS give you a dialysis machine at home and doesn't give you any money to turn it on? Right? There are lots and lots of pieces of equipment that actually the NHS are giving without actually giving the energy that's wanted. There's a disability, there's a chemistry, and then there's a large issue. But if you can, I think that this is actually a way of not creating that cliff edge, but also incentivizing everyone to use that. That reduces every business.
Definitely come on what we do, I'd like to check your and what's coming through. This is a very important point from all the sectors. But that question about if you institute a policy that essentially designates a certain group of people as getting help and a certain group of people not getting help, you see that there's a line between those two. And that cliff edge is always sort of exciting stuff. So I don't think, Nick, if you can talk a little bit about what the opinion research is about, how people feel about means testing and that cliff edge. And the real world experience about how clients experience those.
So the polling is quite difficult to get into the just because you have to explain quite a lot before you can ask a straightforward question on the percentage. So this is something we also focus through. It's qualitative analysis. People generally don't much like the idea of means testing, although they're very personal benefits, very expensive. They've sort of gone around the argument of sort of understanding means testing some sort should be the way forward. And on cliff edges, yeah, they absolutely don't expect politicians who design policies to be the permanent. Even though that is the system of some of our benefit systems, the public think that that's practice. Obviously, politicians will design a scheme with a tailor
lesson for those of us who do run things through some practical policy models. So we help these tests. Yeah, they're rational and very allocated resources and they're aggressive and they're smart. It's just actually our right ideas could have investments are quite bad. So that's my main takeaway from this program so far. So, but in terms of the experience of other people coming to see the device, how common bring it to university, they're running up against the limitations of means testing instead of relying costing a lot.
So I mean, it's quite interesting that if you go back to the philosophy, that was to a large extent about trying to address the multiple benefits. What universal credit was trying to do is to say that's what going from out of work into work, and that's what the team is doing. So personal credit itself, is business means it's designed. The issue is that because it is not so there are benefits with like childcare support, you get quite a lot of childcare support on universal credit. If you get to the point where you've got no capacity any childcare, sort of thing. And there are lots of social charities doing this, and there are social charities in most next three of them. In Parkland, I've been saying, it's quite striking. Not that long ago when I told System of Life, I'm still talking about non-payment discounts as being so it does feel that thinking about social charity is really hard. Driving where you are locked into is very high risk. There is no differentiation to people's income. The difficulty is that it's taking out of the educators. There, the other thing is the social charity agenda.
The other one was the concepts in place for bring a certain group of people at lower costs, whereas the people costs with revenue with the money being come from that's where other than while one is slightly unresolved in this way. But we've got about 20 minutes left. That's part of what I'm putting in to get some thoughts and questions from you. Generally, in principle, your thoughts about policy look like. Any questions or observations about research involved engagement? I should also say, Nick mentioned earlier on that we would do more polling as part of this project. We're still advising the questionnaire for that polling, so maybe the questions and ideas that we ought to be following. I can't guarantee we'll be doing that, but there is an opportunity to help research there. So, there's a hand at the back of the white shirt. That's fine, yeah, just check. Thank you
very much. Yeah, just interested to hear a bit more from Nick about the energy efficiency component of the research you did. Quite striking that people sort of, weren't really aware or unsure about what, if any, the benefits were of more insulation, and then, perhaps understandably, then not really thinking of its government's role to help provide it, because you don't think it's important and why to provide it. So, could you say more about kind of how those discussions worked, and then thinking about kind of future research? Do people change their mind the more that they have about what government's role should be, or is that kind of quite fixed?
Sorry, do those involved? Well, I'm sorry.
Colin Bishop from E3T.
So yeah, when we start introducing the topic of energy efficiency, as I said, people don't generally feel that they need it, which is surprising given that, as you will know, there are 7 million uninsulated lofts and 3 million uninsulated cavity walls in Britain. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. We have some of the least well-insulated properties in Europe. If you start digging into it, people are willing to do it, but there are a bunch of barriers. So if it's free, people will accept it and they will make the allowances around it. If it costs them something, they're much less likely to do it. And upfront cost is, particularly in the homeowner group, a really but we've seen in previous schemes like the Eco scheme that hassle costs can just be a barrier in itself. It's been avoided free. The fact that you've got to empty all the boxes out of the lot in order to get something that's going to save you possibly a couple £100 a year, that's too much hassle. Now, I wonder whether with bills being 2,500 rather than, when that was the issue of more like 11, whether that additional price will change those behaviour. People will be more willing to take the boxes out of the attic. I don't know if we'll have to see the hassle factor does remain a challenge. And then just general advice, where do people get to know what issues, what insulation measures work for their particular property. That's what's different for every individual. What they cost, where they can get them provided. Who is a reputable person to trust? Trust becomes a big factor.
You spend a lot of time on energy innovation. Is there any energy efficiency can be relatively low tech? Stuff on the top. Is there are innovative ways to deliver that, make the consumer journey easier and more accessible?
Well, I mean, I think the price point now is more of a driver. We have a very weak supply chain because it's never really been a priority. We haven't really kick-started it as a service sector in a proper sense. We're not conflating it with rewards for energy suppliers, because again, the incentive for an energy supplier to sell you as much energy, and this sort of dual thing that a supplier is meant to deliver eco, which is the energy efficiency component, and lose money as a result of energy efficiency. All the incentives are in the wrong place, and we've got to really change that, in my view, through a service model. The one other point, which again I experienced in my old patch, and that is private landlords. Some of the properties that I went into, first of all, as you walked to the front door, you could smell the damp, right? I mean, really, and everyone's clothes smelt of the damp. And then when you went into the homes, you might as well have just moved the windows in the middle of it. There's regulation there that absolutely has to be in place, and
most people in the group probably would stop doing things again. We should do more ambulance. It's almost no brainer. One of the challenges that come up against is on the point about housing tech is harder to deliver this sort of year change.
Yes, yeah, so certainly, I mean, installation energy efficiency is one of the things that we feel is they absolutely has to be addressed during this 2-year period, because it's things that can make a huge amount of difference. We put out some research showing about so there is a real there for there are all sorts reliant on others to do the work, and I think it's something we've been looking at for some time, and there's a little trio of things which are very much rely on what find out what might be useful to find suppliers, definitely protection, and they vision and so we
Well, I'm glad you said scanning. We didn't say last week that they voted on the appointments as well, and there was quite a thing actually saying that I'm going to do this. The market is trying to get story. I think to get together this view from a conservative perspective, because actually I'm surprised that so far there hasn't been more of a connection between the government's energy price guarantee and energy. Looking at what this government has done on energy prices, what that is, but essentially every source of energy consumed in the country, taxpayers are now paying for it, share or value. And so the more energy you supply and the taxpayer. And I admit 20 years. Well, I remember the days when the Conservative Party was quite interested in saving public money. And we now have a policy where the more energy we use, the more public money is spent. And yet we don't have a message from the Conservative Party that it's a good idea to therefore use less energy. I keep being told I couldn't get back to comment, but there is going to be bad about somewhere. But I think it's very striking that we are sort of kind of missing in this conversation a deep drive on energy efficiency, but partly address some of the lack of understanding and lack of engagement that needs to work on it's like that people don't necessarily realise that if they increase energy efficiency, then they can reduce those the big reduce their bills quite a lot. So I'm just I'm not asking you to thank the current state of the why do you think a government that has put itself and the taxpayer on the hook for the cost of energy consumption isn't doing more to reduce the level of that consumption?
Firstly, I would say I'm not necessarily an expert on what the Conservative Party is. It's to be looking at in these areas. But so on one hand, taking this government off the hook and talking about all governments, and that is actually they love big things. Right? So and I've got 3 new nuclear power stations and lots of offshore wind. So people understand how in government and the Treasury does the big stuff. It's always been a problem actually with energy efficiency to get it into the heads of the Treasury. They never so they understand growth, GDP. What they don't understand, strangely enough, despite the fact that this is the theme of this conference, is productivity, i.e. cost reduction. And they don't know how to measure it. They also find it very, very difficult to measure and feel confident about what one would call distributed measures. So distributed measures, every single home having insulation, bringing the whole system costs down. So there's an institutional, and Claire would understand much more than I on this, but this is my observation from the outside. They don't understand that distributed action. And if you look at, let's say, rooftop solar, right? My God, that just went mad. Government absolutely hit them from behind because they couldn't understand that actually consumers can make choices, they can drive change, and they can offer new opportunities. On your issue about demand, I mean, yes, we were all there saying, and is not just demand, but if we think about the price of peak, every single percentage of peak is sort of 3 times the cost of the previous percentage of peak. So you've got this massive, massive additional cost. If you can bring that peak down, improving productivity and saving consumer bills. This winter is a really, really big example. So I think we need a massive communications campaign. I think we need to be giving free products out much, much cheaper than the price cap. And whether those be, I mean, the most basic stuff, whether it be just insulation things. You remember those snakes? I've just bought 4 of them, right? I mean, in the last week, that is, and I'm meant to understand energy, right? So we just need to be able to be protecting and conserving as much energy as possible.
So over the opportunity to talk to your experience in
Yes.
Whitehall about why the machinery of government doesn't necessarily manage to do so well in the delivery of small important things like
Well, I mean, I think Laura's absolutely right. There is a tendency to look at large amounts of things, which is nature of policy, because I think that's much the nature of. But there is also often a tendency to see buckets. So I mean, I had the same observation too, that actually in a moment where the government there's an incentive like but the complexities of government accounting mean that one possibly the money. So there is lots of methodology in groups together. The energy efficiency, most energy efficiency has a payback period of there are all sorts of barriers. The other thing I've just point on the communication campaign, because there's, as well as the energy efficiency side of time reduction, there is also the what are the choices that people find. In cases we can do. Somebody needs to make these points, but nobody wants to pay them.
We'll actually, we've got 3 hands up. We'll do them all together. So you might do there, live there, and then there. So we'll do them all together and try and answer them in class. So
Okay, so I'm Matt Pickens from the Energy Ombudsman. I was wondering about, once you start thinking about what we see, most of the complaints that we get is unsurprisingly about bills. So that point of billing has become, it's in many cases the only touch point that someone might have in an energy system. So just thinking about some of the roles in that trust and fairness and some of the points that Laura was making, we are moving into a world that's going to be much more demand driven, and we'll need to deal with some of these questions about, Nick touched on people's perceptions of what's the profits being made. There's some of these questions about greenwashing, about what's the cost of all of this net zero stuff. There's plenty of other events at the conference to be debating that.
yes, one for the
Almost like I would step up, but I wasn't. Yeah. So just wondering about what role do you think in your project, where are you thinking about the narrative role of how you price and what that does, and where that sits in work you do?
Hello, I'm Caroline from Progress Financial, and I'd just like to endorse Nick's points about what consumers have been saying about energy bills and the events since the start of the year. But my question was actually about those parts of the UK that are not connected to the gas network. Very many parts of the UK, rural areas, not entirely, where people have to have solid fuel. So literally, you need enough money for a tanker of petrol to come and deliver. Often, particularly Scotland and Northern Ireland, those are parts of the country that have got very poor quality housing stock as well. So, what's the solution for those kinds of households that have an additional challenge in terms of how they are supported to for energy efficiency, but also what we do with them?
Hi, I'm Grant Duxbury from the charity Groundwork. We're part of that demand reduction system, so people advise and you can free stuff away all the time. And it does work, but most of it these days is paid for by the health sector, as opposed to anybody in the energy space, which is quite interesting. But I just want to make another connection and go back to what you were saying, Laura, about the weakness of the supply chain, the energy efficiency side. Is there another connection that's not being made here with forest policy? Massively ramping up training and development in that sector and helping small traders expand. One of the things you'll find at the moment, if you've got a reputable plumber or heating engineer, they'll basically say, I don't go for that US source heat pump or ground source heat pump, not reliable, too expensive, and actually I don't know how to do that stuff. That's a boiler with a boiler set, so we need to end in that place.
Right, so I will tell us one to the order. On Matt's point about I'm going to look first on price and again it's the consumer experience. How do you think we can the consumer entry to the market is a happen, there's more consumer power, right?
I mean, I think Matt's absolutely right. I mean, it's got to be a very different experience in 2 years' time. I mean, I have a preference, but I think that actually what we need is we need lots of different types of experience, because if you've got the 3 Teslas and the swimming pool, or you're in a sort of housing association flat, you're going to be very, very different, and you're going to need different experiences. The problem at the moment is we've just got a vanilla system where actually the choice that consumers have is really between different coloured logos and actually very little else, right? So there's no differentiation. I think your point though, Matt, about the narrative is really, really important. And we did some work for Recosting Energy, which was talking about the decarbonisation, maybe this is for your panel later, decarbonisation dividends, right? And how do we deliver that dividend? A lot of it's through energy efficiency, but it is also about the decoupling of fossil fuels from our renewables and ensuring that there is value that comes through that. But net zero is fundamentally an optimization model, not a consumption model, as a theoretical process. And that's why, in my mind, the retail experience needs to be much more around services, which brings in your skills point and the energy efficiency point, rather than a commodity consumption. And if you do that, actually, it's in the interest of those suppliers to reduce your consumption, because actually they make a higher margin. But that's
It's advice to me that has massive growth on data. We've come to be what do you find about people who are often read different regions and nations far away, don't have the normal experience of the market?
Yeah, so I mean, it certainly comes up as a problem, particularly, and obviously we are across England and Wales and in rural areas. It's most strikingly so. So as you say, there's a problem because you have to buy in bulk, particularly when people have left them the oil go, then the cost of replacing it just I mean, there is a component of governance which is intended to create, and actually in absolute terms, the costs of oil, while they've gone up, have as some other costs, but it certainly comes up regularly for us as a in those areas, and there are actually there are a lot of areas as I think we've had to see this sort of those things. Those you parts of grid and even also so it's definitely needs to in terms of what you said, then there's quite an open which are likely to be
in terms of what the research we're talking about is, I think we haven't got enough attention on that moment. So I'm saying because on the last point on growth point and jobs, I'll just say very briefly. Yes, I agree entirely, and also I will shamelessly I will advertise this amount of work here. Partly we've actually got a couple of surveys looking at some of the questions around skills and labour force involved in delivering it. It would be bigger, and ongoing work in base, very more of the skill across the radio protein in this whole part of the problem is that it's a small diverse community of lots of sole traders actually ask the government how many people are currently qualified, for example, to fit heat pumps. This is their diet because they don't need them. Pumps aren't registered. That's a big challenge, and we have that. And actually, again, if anybody's free at one day, they do come along to the doing on net zero, and because here from Sam Richards. Sam Richards was in demonstration recently doing the environmental and has a project which is now we're talking about at that event, which is looking quite hard at around employment and employment skills program. So that's my phone has just flashed up. You saying yes, I've gone over time. The cardinal sin of the chair. So I will held you here against your will for a whole 2 minutes of your lives that you were going to plan problems. I'm going to wrap things up. But thank you all very much for coming. Do keep stay in touch with us about this project. The next steps that I mentioned about will be producing an interim report. In about November time, we then head on to a final report with our recommendations for long-term energy. So that will come out in the spring. The real spring, not the white spring. So in the spring, we will produce that report very much like during that project. We did to call again on next engagements. That's about all. I'm just going to say, thank you all for coming. And before you go, give a hand of thanks to our panel for